Well, hello everyone, and welcome to the Masters of Travel Advisory Series. And my name is John Werner. I'm the president of MAST Travel Network. We're a network of over 200 travel agencies spread across the country, all experts in travel around the world. And today we have with us Jenny Cagle, who is the owner of Elm Grove Travel in Elm Grove, Wisconsin. And Jenny had just returned from a trip to England, the north of England and Scotland, traveled with Avanti Destinations, which is a travel company that are experts in travel to that part of Europe and really all over Europe and other destinations around the world. So, Jenny, anyway, when you on your recent trip, just give us a little overview of your itinerary and the cities that you visited.
You bet. Yeah, it was a great itinerary. It was action-packed, full of lots of opportunities to learn about the destinations. We started out in Manchester, England, spent 2 nights there. Then we headed into the Lake District, so visited Windermere Lake and the communities in that area. And then we continued on north into Scotland, where we stayed in Lake Lomond, just a little bit outside of Glasgow, and then we wrapped up with 2 nights in Edinburgh. So it was jam-packed and really fabulous.
Yeah, it sounds like a fabulous itinerary and something a little bit different than what some travelers do when they go to the UK and England in particular, starting in London. And you just probably flew into London and then went north right away, or did you fly into Manchester?
Yep, I flew into Manchester,
Okay.
and that was what the majority of people did.
Okay,
We
yeah.
happened to start there, and it was great. I had only been to London previously in England and hadn't put a lot of thought into other parts of
Sure.
the country that I wanted to visit, and now having been there, I'm already trying to figure out where our next spot will be.
Yeah, that's super. And I know Manchester has really had a renaissance, so to speak, over the past maybe a decade or two, and transforming from a purely industrial city to arts and
Yeah.
food. Just a great cultural destination now, and of course, very famous for its soccer teams. And so, what did you find most impressive about Manchester?
It really broke the stereotype I had of the city. I definitely envisioned it as a very industrial, kind of gray city, but it was full of life. It was, like you said, a renaissance. There were some really great historic buildings, but then right next door there was a 30-year-old building. And there was an area that we kept kind of coming upon where they would say 4 years ago none of those skyscrapers were there, and it was a whole little community of these huge modern buildings in the backdrop of these ancient buildings. And so
Right.
I just loved kind of that juxtaposition of old and new. And for sure the food was shocking. I thought, people think of bangers and mash when you
Yes.
think of food
Yes.
in England. And in Manchester we had some outstanding food at some really modern and cool restaurants. There was a gin distillery where we had dinner, and it was fantastic. And we did a street food tour, or a walking tour of food, and each spot was really surprising.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, it sounds like great culinary experiences, and of course you can't go wrong with sampling the local cuisine.
Right.
And so that's always special. And any highlights of museums that you went to?
yep, we went to the Chatham Library, which is one of the oldest in the world, and it was kind of like walking into the Harry Potter library. Really, it was up on a second floor, and it was just row after row of really ancient books. And so it was just visually very stunning, and then just kind of sitting there and soaking in the history of it
Right.
was really, I thought, a pretty cool highlight.
Yeah, I'll bet. And so you spent, what, 2 nights there?
2 nights there.
Okay.
So in addition to that, we also toured the Manchester City Stadium, which is one of the soccer teams that
Right.
are there. And it's definitely a city divided. There's Man U fans and Man City fans. And so since we toured the stadium, that I'm a Man City fan
Right.
now.
Yeah,
So that was
that's
super fun, and you really just kind of saw what passion people in Europe and in England really have for their football.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, that's I think that's a great experience to have there as well, because it's just a whole different world when it comes to soccer and how it's viewed and how big it is in Europe in particular.
Well, and to be there during World Cup, because England had won their game and were advancing then on Saturday, and so to be in that stadium and just kind of feel all that excitement, it was really, it was neat.
Yeah. Did they have like viewing parties or watch parties? Or
They did.
Yeah.
Yep, they did. They were all over.
I'll bet. So then after you, and I think Manchester is the second largest city in England, but so then you go outside the city and you go into the countryside, and it's a totally. I know you mentioned going to the Lake District, and it's describe the Lake District a lot. Some people don't ever get to go that far north.
Right. Yeah, it was really interesting because, like any time you leave a city, it's city, 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 and then here it got really country really quick, and so there weren't a ton of freeways, so it was lots of meandering roads as you kind of wound out of the city into the lake country. Windermere is this huge, really long lake. So one of the experiences we had was a lake cruise. So we sailed from the southern end to the northern end of the lake on a little sightseeing boat.
Right.
And that was super interesting because the scenery there was beautiful. And it's coming from Wisconsin, our lakes are all pretty built up with summer homes and residents. And it was very different. There were very, very few homes on the lake. And when you get into the Lake District, it's a protected area. And so all of that land was donated long ago to the country to be protected and never developed. And so it really was a very rural and beautiful and kind of bucolic area.
I'm sure. What were the accommodations like then that you were able to stay in that area versus where the kind of hotel you stayed at in Manchester?
Yeah, so in Manchester, we stayed at the Kimpton, which was beautiful in an old building, but modern rooms. And then our one night in the Lake District, we really stayed in a more historic inn. It probably had about 30 or 40 rooms, a very beautiful little dining room, lots of fireplaces. It was beautifully decorated for Christmas, so you definitely felt like you were in this little Hallmark movie a little bit. And it was a much smaller, independently owned kind of place. And we toured a number of hotels in that area, and they were all very similar to that. So you can have that modern big hotel experience and then follow it up with that kind of smaller, intimate hotel.
Sure. Did you get to do, besides the lake cruise and everything, were you able to do other any kind of like adventure sort of like experiences?
We didn't adventure much, but we did tour a couple of different locations. William Wordsworth is a poet from that area, and so we visited his home, and that is a brand new museum that has had this huge infusion of capital and a huge renovation, and so that was neat. There were about 5 people from that museum that were there with us in the evening, and they were so passionate about his work and his poetry and what it meant to that area, so it was super cool to see that. And then we also toured a home that had been built during the arts and crafts era, and so it was a real traditional arts and crafts home, way more than we've ever seen, in an arts and crafts style home here. So that was neat. We did really a variety of different things in just the one day we were there. So it was a quick day.
Everything was travel by motor coach that Avanti Destinations arranged. And was anything by rail?
We didn't. Nope. On this one, we were moving pretty quickly, and it was mini coach. This was a relatively small group. And there were times where we had just a smaller car if a few of us were doing something. So it was a great opportunity to see the suppliers that Avanti works with, and the experience our clients would get in terms of the vehicles and the drivers and the knowledge of the guides.
And I know they work with a lot of local suppliers in the destinations, the people who live there, and they know where to go and all the ins and outs of the local, and a lot about, of course, local culture. And So, and you had a guide, the same guide with you from start to finish?
We didn't, it wasn't like an escorted tour
Okay.
guide. So we were with different people as we
Oh,
moved
okay.
along.
Okay.
So our guides in the museum were those that are there. So it really did, it was nice to kind of transition from who
Yes.
you would work with in Manchester to who you'd be with in each of the
Okay.
subsequent areas. So it was
Yeah.
really neat. And the thing that was great is we had a lot of interaction with the tourist boards because
Yeah.
Avanti works with them
Right.
very closely. So we got some great insight and they coordinated some nice events for us to really experience the
Yeah.
destination.
And that's so key, like when you're talking to your customers and you have that level of knowledge, kind of almost like, being an insider in a way. So then after you left the Lake District, that's when you crossed into Scotland.
Yep, so we continued north, more little two-lane windy roads, kind of winding through the valleys of the mountains that
Sure.
are there. We made a stop at an old castle built in like the 1500s, and we met the family that's now 15th or 16th generation of the castle, and just had lunch with them in their dining
Oh,
room,
nice.
and definitely had a really cool and authentic experience
Yeah.
with this family who's now trying to figure out how do you keep this heritage of this
Sure,
castle alive
sure.
and how do you monetize that. So they're focusing on tourism, and
Right.
so it was neat
Makes
for us
sense.
to be there and share our perspective with them and them to share theirs. So it
Yeah,
was
what a
neat.
great experience for both of you, and
It
to
was.
learn from each other. And you didn't stay overnight there, though.
No.
They don't. Do they have accommodations?
Nope, that's something they're working on.
Okay.
So that was something that we were talking
Okay.
about. The son, who's probably 30-ish now, he's taken it over from his mom and dad, and so
Okay.
he's lobbying to them
Yeah.
that they need to create accommodation there. So
right.
it was cool. It was really neat.
Yeah, I'm sure if they, there's such a big demand for those kinds of experiences and lodging like that, accommodations like that. So I'm sure they would do quite well.
I
if
think
they
so. I
found
mean, it
that.
was remote,
Yeah.
but the setting was absolutely beautiful, and it was on a high elevation,
Sure.
like castles should be,
Yeah.
and you looked into the valley, and it was a great setting.
Wow.
And then from there, we crossed into Scotland and got up to Loch Lomond.
Okay. Now Loch Lomond is outside of Glasgow, right?
Right, like 20 minutes to a half an hour outside
Okay.
of Glasgow.
And as lakes go, is that a large lake?
It was, yeah. I think it was smaller than Windermere, but not by much. And
Okay.
so it was a really large lake, very deep actually.
Okay.
And there were a couple of little towns and villages
Mm-hmm.
along the lake. So we spent the night, and then the next day we took off pretty early, but we stopped at one of the villages and
Okay.
got a really good feel for the lake, and then continued up and around and wound
Sure.
up that day in Edinburgh.
So up to this point of the trip, what were you normally eating? From breakfast, lunch, dinner, or what was that like?
So it was our first day we were in Manchester on a Sunday, so we had the typical Sunday roast dinner
Oh.
that an English family
Sure.
would have, which was fabulous. We also had a lot of seafood along the way,
Yeah.
whether it was lake or ocean, because you're never far
Right.
from the ocean there. So we had some fantastic seafood, and then as we kind of headed into Scotland, had quite a bit of lamb, and so and everything was so modern. You have these expectations that
Yeah.
it's old fashioned, but everything was super modern, and just you could see that the cuisine was evolving all the time.
I think it's just like in other places around the world and in the United States as well. I mean, there's just a lot of great chefs now, and it's a really that whole world has really become sophisticated.
Definitely.
So-
And that's exactly how I would describe it. It was
Yeah.
definitely very sophisticated food,
Yeah.
which I didn't necessarily expect.
Sure.
So-
Yeah, especially in the countryside, you would think it's going to be very traditional.
Right.
But no, that's
Yeah,
fantastic.
it was really good.
Was there any memorable places that you stopped and ate and I don't know if you paired it with local beers or wines, although maybe that part of England's not known for wine, but anyway, beer or other spirits.
Well, we in Manchester, we did a gin tasting, and we were in a gin distillery really great story about a husband and wife who kind of came together, and
Right.
they wanted to create a brand, and so they started this gin, and then the restaurant next door paired some really great foods.
Neat.
Yeah, it was fantastic. We also, of course, did a whiskey distillery as we were heading over to Edinburgh, and that was fantastic and
Great.
just interesting to try the whiskeys and scotches
Yes.
in Scotland.
We have to do
versus-
that in Scotland,
I mean,
right?
you can't.
have to-
You can't
yeah.
not do that. But to have compared it to what's available in Kentucky, and just
Yes.
kind of whiskey and scotch are so big right now
Yeah.
that it was really neat to
To be
experience
able
those.
to do that,
Mhm.
yeah.
And then we spent some time in the Christmas market one day, so there were some local street foods that we tried in the evening. So that was, it was really a neat experience.
So then after you left Lake Lamont, is that how you pronounce
Yep.
it? You went to Edinburgh.
Yep.
And so I know Edinburgh is so famous for many things, and the Georgian architecture there is just
It was
phenomenal. So what did you find, most amazing about Edinburgh?
I just loved what a great walking city it was.
Right.
I mean, it's definitely hilly. It's not easy walking, but you would just kind of come around this random corner and there would be the next ancient building that was
Right.
just absolutely stunning. Running through the center of the old town, they had their Christmas market, which was a much bigger deal than I expected.
Sure.
It was really beautiful. And then really just to go up to the Edinburgh Castle and see that. I mean, we had dinner our first night there, so it's obviously pitch dark and you're not sure where you are. And the next day we walked and I'm like, oh, we were right by the castle. It was
Yes.
right there.
Yeah.
So that really, I thought, was a highlight, and just really experiencing it on foot, which we did. We walked just kind of
Very
all over that
walkable city, other
I
than the
thought
fact that
so.
it's hilly.
Right,
Yeah.
but I mean, everything is close. It's
Right.
very city center. There's so many different attractions that are right there. So I just loved exploring it, and
Okay.
it felt incredibly safe. Even
Yeah.
at night, we were busy, obviously all day during the day doing various tours. So we did a lot of our exploring at night, and never
Right.
once did I feel uncomfortable or worried. So
Yeah.
that was a great surprise.
No, that's good to hear. There's some, so many fantastic places and very safe, a lot of safe
Right.
places to go. So, how many nights did you spend there?
2 nights, and we actually stayed at the new Virgin Edinburgh Hotel,
Oh.
which was the first Virgin hotel in Europe. So that was exciting to be.
Yeah.
Super unique, and lots of little
Right.
unique features and little nooks, and so that was a really great place to stay.
Well, that sounds cool too, as the different types of accommodations you've had on the trip, from country, old-fashioned kind of inn
Yeah.
to more of a modern city hotel.
Right.
And so, what other special things did you do in Edinburgh?
We did a walking food tour there as well. And so the thing that was neat about that, we had spent most of our time kind of in that old town city center.
Sure.
And this took us into a whole different neighborhood. And so we
Okay.
did some really unique things. We tried haggis there,
Oh.
which was actually not terrible.
Really?
It was not
I've never
terrible.
had it, so I don't know.
We didn't have it in a traditional form. It was
Okay.
kind of like a haggis fritter.
Oh, okay, yes.
So it was much
had to be
more
masked.
palatable for the American
Right.
palate, but it was really, it was good. And we, they do a lot of smoked salmon in that part of the country, so we had some great smoked salmon on that tour. We went into this really old little
Great.
pub, had a little selection of cheese, and tried different whiskeys there.
Neat.
So
Yeah.
I mean, we
Neat.
really, and these were all things that our clients could do.
Yes.
So we weren't doing anything that was, that we couldn't offer a client.
Yeah.
So it was exciting now to be able to take all that knowledge
Yes.
and really talk with some firsthand experience for
And
clients.
the guide that you had, you had someone different as you went along the trip, but they really probably brought the local history, everything to life, really put meaning into what you're seeing and what you're doing. So yeah, they lend a lot to the experience.
They do, and that's what I love about the food tours in a city. It isn't just about trying
Right.
food, it's really about hearing the story from
Yeah.
a local and
Right.
pointing out different things. I mean, we didn't look at any famous buildings while we were on that tour, but we learned a lot about life
Yes.
in that city, which is really neat.
Yeah, that's great. It's like getting the best of both worlds because who doesn't love food, right? And so then you get to eat and you're learning at the same time.
Right. And a lot of the food tour people are independent, at least on the two that we had. They were independent guides who picked their favorite places and the places they were comfortable with. And so you kind of walk into the neighborhood pub and, get the big hello. So it was really well done.
And of course, it's winter there as it is in the this part of the United States. And so, what was the weather like?
We had a little tiny bit of rain in Manchester, and it was probably in the mid-30s to the low 40s, so it was definitely brisk.
Yeah.
But I think we lucked out because we definitely had 5 very sunny, clear sky days. So
that's
made the temperatures, manageable.
Tolerable. Yeah,
right.
Yeah, because I know that they get just like we do, cloudy weather in Wisconsin, northern Illinois, lots of clouds in the winter.
Yep.
So
we were pleasantly surprised and didn't need the umbrellas. So we lucked out.
It's what you want when you're on a trip and on vacation. So who do you think, what kind of customers would you recommend this kind of a trip?
Oh, gosh. So I actually, as I was getting closer to this trip, I wound up getting 2 new inquiries for Scotland. And randomly, while I was there, I got an inquiry about Manchester, which is so crazy.
Wow,
I don't know that I've ever, right? It was perfect. But I think someone who's a little bit adventurous and who's done the big cities of Europe and now just wants to experience more culture and just kind of lifestyle things, really, those are this itinerary would be perfect for that person.
Yeah.
And kind of bookending it with big cities on the front and back and then filling in with all the country. Yeah. I think it makes for a really great pace and a great experience because you see so much.
Yeah, it sounds like you were able to also be more with the locals, as people say, I want to do things that the locals do. But you were able to get closer to the local culture as we've been talking about.
Well, and I think in those kind of urban or rural spots where it's countryside and people go to vacation, the Lake District, that's where the UK residents vacation. Sure. So you do see a little bit more of just the culture and uninterrupted by big cities. So it was great.
Life as it is today.
Exactly.
Too, there, very much so. So then you flew back from Edinburgh?
From Edinburgh. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, it just sounds like such a fantastic itinerary.
It really was. And it was jam-packed. I mean, you probably wouldn't do all that for a client in 6 nights, but it was just, you could see then, experience the distances and help build it into a 10 or 12-day itinerary for a client.
So when you're on the coach going from point A to point B, what was the normal travel time that you'd spend on there?
Oh, I would say we would do a 2-hour drive and then have a stop and explore. Right. And then I think our longest drive was probably from Windermere up to Lake Lomond. Okay. That was our longest. Okay. That was probably 4 hours, but we had a little stop in the middle. So
it was very much broken up, and so that you get to experience everything along the way.
Right, and none of it was long distances. Yes. I'm sure if we looked at the total number of miles we covered, it's not tons because it's a pretty small country.
Exactly. So, and then I know Avanti Destinations does many types of itineraries like this, where you really, it's not just the big cities like you were saying, so that you really get to enjoy a lot of the smaller places, I guess you could say.
Well, and I think you can use it for just about any client. When clients come with an idea, Avanti really has components available throughout Europe. Sure. So it isn't, to your point, limited to the big cities, the iconic cities.
So just one more question. Name the 3 best highlights of the trip.
oh, that's so cruel.
'Cause you
because
loved
there were so
everything. You
many,
loved
right?
everything.
We kept asking each other that, oh, what was your favorite thing today? And it's, someone's like, well, it's like asking me who my favorite kid is.
Yes.
Come on, you know, like, it really was all pretty fantastic. I definitely loved the Manchester City tour. I thought that was exciting. I loved visiting the castle and meeting that family. That was fantastic. And I think while I always knew that Edinburgh was a really cool city, having been there, it was far exceeded my expectation of the city.
Even more special than you.
Yeah, exactly.
felt.
So I would go back there and just explore
Yeah.
for a week. It was such a great city.
Nice,
So,
nice.
yeah, so tough to pick one, but
Right.
it was all pretty great.
Yeah, sounds fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, Jenny, thank you so
Yeah.
much for spending some time talking about your trip and everything. It just sounds like it was wonderful and very special.
It was, and definitely educational. Like, I feel much better positioned to sell that destination and to sell Avanti Destinations.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for joining us
Thanks
today.
for having me.